Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our 8th installment of the Strategies for Working Remotely panel series. Today, we'll be discussing how remote work impacts our creativity and innovation. And it's a real pleasure for me to introduce our panelists today. So I'm Elaine Rayborn, and I'm from Sandia National Laboratories. I'm the series panel lead. And along with my co-moderator, Ashley Barker, we really want to welcome our guest today, Adi Malvi Thakur from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Pat Quillen from MathWorks, Damien Rasan from Sorcery Institute, and Francesca Samsel from TAC, UT Austin. And so we've got a really interesting discussion today planned. And before I start, I just want to let everybody know just a little bit about us and where we're from. So we are from the Department of Energy National Laboratories. That's where Ashley and I are based, and actually most of us do work with the national labs that are on the panel today. And so we're all working remotely, of course, as you are. And we actually started this series back in April 2020 so that we could keep our teams productive, discover new ways that we could do our science remotely. And so here we are today talking about innovation, creativity, 8 sessions later. So before we get started, I just want to introduce some working definitions for our discussion, because there are a number of definitions for creativity and innovation, as I'm sure you're aware. So the ones I chose actually were pretty simple. So from dictionary.com, creativity is really defined as just this ability to transcend traditional ideals or patterns, to combine things in ways to make meaningful forms or methods or interpretations. And thinking is creative when it leads to adaptive solutions or ideas or insights. So that's what we'll be working from today when we talk about creativity. Now, when we talk about innovation, innovation is the introduction of new things and methods, but it depends on who's actually perceiving that object or that idea or that practice. So if it's new to you, it's an innovation, even though it may not be new to somebody else. And innovation results when these novel ideas are actually implemented into products or practices or processes or even policies. So that's what we'll be working with today. All right, so what I'm going to do is ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. I mentioned that we've got a really great group of people. I think that all of our panelists have always been very multidimensional, and especially for this panel, we've curated some panelists that are really involved in a lot of different things. You know, we are involved in science and in art and social science and software. And so we want to bring all those elements together when we talk about the topics today. So you'll see that the questions that we ask, I've grouped them into different categories. We'll talk about creativity and innovation from an individual perspective, from the team perspective, and from an organizational perspective. And if we have time, I hope we'll get into the future of work. So we really want to hear from you. We're hoping that you will contribute into our chat. And also, if you have an opportunity during the panel or after, please fill out our questionnaire. We really welcome your feedback. It helps us create a better panel series. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can go ahead and get started. So oops, you're not supposed to see that one yet. Okay, so let's see. Or that one. Okay. Hang on now, there we go. Okay, so what I'd like to do is ask Adi if you don't mind introducing yourself and getting our panel started.
Sure, thank you, Elaine. I'd be happy to. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Adi Malvi Thakur. As Elaine had introduced me, I'm the group leader for the software engineering group in the Advanced Computing Systems Research section in Computer Science and Mathematics Division at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I have a group of 10 very creative individuals. In addition to that, I work very closely with 12 members of another sister group and 3 other members who are matrixed into our groups, So we have a collaborative space of 25 very innovative individuals, and you can see that a lot in their innovative computing solutions as well as their genius memes that they share. So some of our unique challenges are that our groups are new. And in addition to that, a lot of the members that have joined us during the pandemic. So some of them have actually never met each other in person ever. So how do you get a group of individuals who are now working remotely and have never met each other to kind of come together and be creative and innovate? So one of the main questions, I mean, obviously besides other questions that I would love to explore is what is the difference between being creative as an individual versus working together with a team to innovate? Because I have observed that creativity in individuals may even have gone up for certain people while working remotely. But definitely, as we were setting and forming the teams, we ran into some of the problems where if you've never interacted, how do you get those ideas to go together? So we investigated and we looked into some potential solution. Research says you need face-to-face communication. 93% of our communication is non-verbal. So we came up with the idea and we said, hey, cameras are going to be mandatory in our interactions. So we did encourage individuals to kind of always have their camera on. And in smaller meetings, I would define smaller as less than 10 individuals or maybe definitely less than 12 individuals, we saw the quality of the interactions go really up. So we see almost in all the small meetings, I never ever have to remind anybody that, hey, your camera isn't on. Everybody's on there. People got to become friends who never knew each other. All the ideas are flowing. You see a lot of good things coming out. Just even before people can speak up, nonverbal cues are picked up and say like, hey, that's exactly what I was thinking about. So it was great to see that we were able to establish that while never having met each other, just because we started coming on cameras. Now, with that said, we're still struggling in bigger groups. So I see that as the number of people in the meeting go above 10, cameras start going off, and it's the same set of individuals who always talk, and that flow of ideas kind of stops. So I'm really, really curious to see if anybody else has explored bigger group meetings and have ideas. So looking forward to the rest of the discussions of the panel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eddie. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think we probably all have different experiences with video cameras on and how that impacts the communication. And I think we're going to chat about that a little bit later. So actually, next up, Pat, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure, yeah, and I'd like to thank you again for having me. It's really nice to participate in these kinds of things and think about this sort of stuff, especially I think there's been a lot about remote work in the pandemic that has been positive, and we're starting to think about the transition back to work. But we'll get into that kind of stuff in a second. So my name is Pat Quillen. I do work at MathWorks. We make a product called MATLAB. I've been at MathWorks now for 15 and a half years, and I am the engineering manager and developer responsible for the MATLAB math area, and that handles all of the math in MATLAB. We're also responsible for the PDE toolbox in MATLAB, the MathWorks PDE toolbox, and together we are 17 people, which is actually a getting to be a fairly large group. And so, with Microsoft Teams and Zoom and these kinds of pieces of technology, it can get a little funny, especially when, Teams at least initially only showed you 4 people at a time. And so even with cameras on, it can be a challenge to kind of still read the body language. By way of creativity, sometimes we don't really think that we are doing creative work, right? I mean, most of the work, or a big facet of the work, maybe not most of it, is in designing APIs, command line APIs for MATLAB. And boy, I mean, that's not really an area that one would think is ripe for creativity. But that said, just in fact 2 days ago, one of my team members was talking about, gosh, I did this design. We designed this command line API. I did this design fully remotely, right? Because we've been out of the office for a full year, like many of you, if not all of you. And it was really a slog. And, so she in particular has found that, doing the design work, which frankly, I mean, the end product was just as good and pretty similar to things that she had worked on in the past, right? There's some very knotty design questions that were hard to address, but there was something about all being in the room together and kicking these kinds of design questions with previous API designs that, while kind of unpleasant, and we could go goof around and try to kick it, it was not so much of a slog. But here, she felt really, I guess, like emotionally stifled. And if I asked her, do you feel like your creativity is being hampered? Which of course, I didn't. That would have been too good to actually prepare for this. But um, I doubt she would have said yes. I think she probably thought that she was just as creative doing it, but that the whole process was just a slog, because I think she felt less like we were in it together, which I think is a pretty interesting take. On the other hand, and I know my couple of minutes are about expired. I found that, at an individual level, when I have a moment to think, that even when I'm sitting in meetings, which as an engineering manager, I spend quite a lot of time in meetings, the fact that I am remote has kind of allowed me to be more of a meeting lurker than I would be sitting in a room, right? Because I can now more proactively zone out instead of zoning out in front of people. And so I think there is a minor value to that, pop the camera off and explore an idea on the side. But anyhow, those are just a couple of thoughts to kind of get us started. Thanks again for having me. I'm looking forward to the rest of the panel.
That's great, Pat. Thank you. I appreciate your comments about the ways that you're kind of playing with the lag that we have when we're remote or dispersed, and I'm wondering if that was something that contributed to how she was feeling about the slog. I want to get back into that. That's a pretty cool idea. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So Damien, how about you? How would you like to introduce yourself, and what sorts of things have you been experiencing?
Okay, good. So I'm Damien Rusan. I lead Sorcery Institute, which is a 501c3 nonprofit founded in 2015 and focused on computational science, education, and research. We're mostly known for teaching a lot of training classes, primarily on modern Fortran, although I oftentimes say that Fortran is really more just a vehicle because we're really trying to introduce better software development practices. People come to the course for Fortran and walk out knowing about agile software development and Git workflows and CMake and things like that. And I also founded Sorcery Inc., which is a for-profit that was founded through Sandia National Laboratories Entrepreneurial Separation to Transfer Technology Program, ESTT. It's a leave of absence program that enables researchers who are going to use Sandia intellectual property to go out and either start or join a small business. It's a way that the national labs can show impact on the economy. And you get to leave for up to 3 years with a guarantee that you can come back at your last salary. So it's a nice way to have kind of a low risk attempt at doing a venture. And I guess at the end of the 3 years, I was having too much fun, so didn't go back. So Sorcery Inc. is focused on custom software development and consulting. Most of our clients are government labs. We have 4 employees on the Sorcery Inc. side and only use contractors on the Sorcery Institute side. We have a pretty big network of contractors who work with us on an as-needed basis. So over the last year since the pandemic hit, which I've worked on roughly 4 projects. And initially I had a really hard time figuring out, I have a lot of thoughts on remote work and I have a lot of thoughts on creativity, but I had a really hard time bringing these 2 together and think about how the remote work impacts creativity. So the first thing that came to mind was one of my 4 projects over the past year that I'm just wrapping up is a Better Scientific Software Fellowship from the DOE Exascale Computing Project. And as my activity in the fellowship, I taught and co-taught workshops on agile software development and on Git and GitHub workflows. at UC Merced, San Diego State, and at the SIAM Computational Science and Engineering Conference. And one of the goals of these workshops was to reach a really broad audience. Everything I had done for the prior decade was focused on modern Fortran. So as I said, I would use this as a vehicle to talk about other stuff, but I was never really reaching an audience beyond Fortran. And so to reach a broader audience, the idea that we came up with was to to teach agile software development without software development. So not to have any programming language prerequisite. And instead of focusing on writing code, we focus on document creation using Markdown with embedded LaTeX. And I think the way the remote working impacted that, if I go back to when I first started teaching training courses, we would have a lot of interactions with the site in advance of the course. We'd have to get accounts on a certain system. We'd have to get software installed on the system. And eventually then I moved towards using virtual machines, but even then I've got like a 4 GB download that people have to download, and they have to be familiar with the Linux command line and what have you. So we ended up doing everything in the browser. And I'm actually not sure I would have come up with that idea if everything hadn't been remote, because even coming into the fellowship, I was still imagining a lot of like command line scripting, but I had to really think of a way that people could just jump in, from anywhere and on any platform and be able to interact with what the exercise that we wanted them to work on. We also were trying to figure out how to simulate the experience. When I teach training courses, we'll usually have a hands-on exercise, and I'll walk around the room and look at people's screens and have interactions with them about problems that they're encountering or questions they have. And so we decided to, I keep saying we, I co-taught these workshops with Marianne Leon, who's the president of Sustainable Horizons Institute, and also with one of my employees, Brad Richardson. So what we decided to do is to have people do screen share, because we couldn't have that same experience of walking around the room. And it now suddenly dawns on me that this might be something, even when I do an in-person training course, it still might be useful to have some people in the room screen share so that others can benefit from the discussion that I would have previously just had one-on-one. So I do think that the remote working has had a positive impact on creativity in those two regards. And just more broadly, I would say that even though I don't see a direct link to creativity on my other projects, I do see a lot more productivity. I have a contract with NASA, a researcher at NASA Langley, and initially I thought that I was going to be using some of the contract to travel to go visit this researcher. Now, of course, we do everything over Google Meet, and actually I think we're interacting a lot more than we would have, over the course of a year if I had just swooped in for 1 week or even 2 weeks, to work with him. Because even if I had been there and present, there would have been other things distracting, him, other meetings and what have you. And now every time we interact, we have really focused time, sometimes as much as half a day. So I would say that by having an impact on productivity, and if you're doing something creative like research, then at least indirectly, the remote work is positively impacting creativity as well.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, because I do think that productivity and creativity intersect. And I'd like for us to explore a little bit further that at that intersection, is there a trade-off? Or do we see an increase in productivity and creativity? I think, you guys are alluding to the fact that not necessarily. But I know that a lot of organizations are really concerned about how can we have an increase in both. So let's chat about that. Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Okay, Francesca.
So my name is Francesca Samsel, and I am a research scientist at the Texas Advanced Computing Center at UT Austin. And since most folks are from the DOE, TAC is the NSF's computing center, like high performance computing center for large and small and all jobs across that they fund. And I'm in the visualization department, which is kind of an odd thing, because I have a master's degree in fine arts, in sculpture specifically, and I spent literally the first 30 years of my career painting on the sides of buildings, making large outdoor permanent sculptures, teaching in the art department, printmaking, and a wide range of disciplines within the arts, but and often using science as themes within the work, but beyond, kind of interviewing scientists for that sort of thing, not so much. So it's an odd leap. I was doing some work at a tax visualization facility, and I had put up some of the prints, and that they've got this 32-foot long screen, and I had it stuff moving around and going in and out. And so combining, and my work has always been about combining different source materials. So I had actual visualizations that I had recoded so that they didn't, like make your eyes fall out of your head. And I had, kind of molecular structures, where we were working on H1N1 at the time. And I had, paintings that had to do with sort of inference to the transmission. And so that work, several actually artist in residences in the scientific community, and one of them was here at Los Alamos. And so that's kind of why and how I'm here. And I started working with the visualization team because having been at the lab at UT, I would watch scientists struggle to make their visuals. I mean, like day-long struggles, to make the visuals make any sense. And I'm thinking, guys, you really should just hire somebody, because I could do that in 10 minutes. And just because I've been doing it all my life. And I couldn't do your science for love of money, so. So there was a very forward-thinking program officer, Lucy Knoll, who basically told the lead of visualization here at Los Alamos, you need to go hire an artist. And so when I stumbled on his doorstep, and was actually quite happy to work with the scientists and look at their problems and what they needed out of their visualization, and how might I use my skills and my training to enable them to better understand what's in their data, that was a win. And that was 8 or 9 years ago. And they've been funding me ever since. I'm at UT, but they, or at least they used to anyway, pay for a really large chunk of my time. And so we worked on developing strategies for visualization and that kind of thing. But when I work with the museums, and I work on the science communication that has integrations between poetry and scientist interviews, and visualizations and scenes from their work. I work a lot on the polar science. So when I think about this notion about creativity, that's something obviously in the artistic community that there's a lot of work on. And if I was to have distill a few nuggets or thoughts that stick with me and stick with my practice, is that I think of, there's creativity in my studio alone. Okay, and there's creativity with my team, and they're both critical. I have a team, I work with a wide range of scientists and also technical people. And so I work with a team of 20 on AR, VR work, and that has sculptures flying all over it. And then I also work with a smaller team at UT, and we're doing storytelling and projections and interaction, all kinds of things. Anyway, so in my studio, and I think that this is related a little bit to remote work, there's always a balance between, in the studio, I call it creativity and craft. So I find that the creativity, like the sort of, oh, well, that's interesting moments, come up when I shut off whatever is talking in my head. And I think it was Picasso, but it might have been somebody else who said that good work happens when the critic leaves the room, and great work happens when I leave the room. And that to me is the core. I did a mural at one time. It was about the aquatic life in the Hudson River. And I had to draw these fish. Well, fish aren't terribly inspiring, but the drawings, so I sat down in front of the TV at night and I would draw. And that shut off part of my brain, some of the best work I've ever done. And that's that leaving the room concept. And it's, but it's not that you can leave the room all the time, but it's that balance between focusing on your craft but also leaving time, unstructured brain time, I'm going to call it. then when I'm working with the teams, I have small teams and large teams. My small team in Austin, I was recently back. So I'm in Los Alamos right now, but I was recently back in Austin. And we've been working together on this project for 9 months or so. But and there were just 3 of us in the room talking about where we wanted to go with this kind of projected interactive science storytelling. The ideas were just flying fast and furious. And I think partly because we had kind of this pent up activity going on, but there's both of my team members also have some artistic training. There's this exchange that happens that I could never do by myself, but that builds on the expertise of the multidisciplinary team. And that is the most rewarding thing. And lastly, then the larger teams, I work with a large team of 20 of us on Skype. Oh yeah, my head hurts when I think about it. And we used to, when I would fly up to Minnesota to work with them, they'd fly down to work with me. It was a very different experience. And I think that the harder challenge is the larger teams. And the key is that with the smaller teams, I will have one-on-ones with my team members without an agenda. And that's when we get the interesting work done and really it's kind of hard because you think of time as so precious. But with a larger team, that's really difficult. And so I don't have so many answers with that one.
That's great. Thank you. I really think this is great. The way that everything that you guys have said is really playing off each other. It's almost as if we planned this, but we didn't. So, I mean, we started, with Addie mentioning that, cameras on, cameras off is really important. So it's that quality of the communication that you're having when you're remote. And then what the rest of you have been really saying is there's been some discussion about the temporal aspects of remote work, how there's a lag, how you can feel kind of isolated, if you're working remotely, communicating with others, but the tempo is different. So that has an impact. And then I like this idea of thinking about creativity as individuals and in the team and in the larger organization, larger teams. So the one-on-ones, the small groups and larger. So I'm wondering now if we can push on that. I'd like to open up this discussion to the rest of, to everybody now on the panel. The questions that we put together for the part about individual creativity have to do with, do you do your best work when you're isolated? How do you do good work if you're constantly interrupted and you've got your distractions by, working from home? What are some of the strategies that you've used? So I'm wondering if we can start with that. If there's anything that you all want to mention that hasn't already been mentioned with regard to your individual creativity. And anyone can start. I'm not going to call on anybody.
I can start.
Yeah, please do, Addie. Thank you.
One of the things that really helped me was really setting up a space. So I had a working desk even before the pandemic, but was nowhere near extensive to facilitate creative thinking. So, I think I spent a lot of time gathering my favorite books and getting a desk that actually supports my thinking process. And once I had that space, I felt like it just got to be a spot where I can just go sit anytime during the day to find some creative time. And I think that really helped.
I like that you have, you designated like a creative space. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Anyone else do that?
Well, I do that. And I've also found a standing desk was a big help. But I think that there's the space and the time issue is quite interesting. I mean, I'm fortunate my kid is in college and I don't, he doesn't want to talk to me anyway. So, but I find that and we talk about this a lot in the arts, like the first 20, 30 minutes in your studio, forget even throw those away, and it's sort of once your brain is kind of totally immersed in that zone that the good stuff happens. And I know that that's hard for a lot of people. But the one thing I've found, because I think I spend more time in Zoom meetings than I ever spent in real meetings, is that I start my day with just literally like 5 or 10 minutes of breathing, and I don't schedule anything for that kind of 8:30 to 10 hour, because that's my best time. That's my best thinking time and my best working time. And so that kind of lets me get the distractions that are inside my brain out of there.
That's an interesting strategy. I like that. Anybody else schedule anything like that? I would call that, I schedule for myself deep work. So I actually put that on my calendar where, you know, it may seem a little contrived to actually have to schedule that, but I plan it for periods of the day where I know that I'm at my best, and it might follow exercise or something where, you know, I have already kind of, as you say, worked out some of those things. Yeah. Anybody else try that? Pat, do you ever do something like that?
Well, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking that I need to. I mean, certainly I block my own time. But you know, I mean, you know, a couple of things, you know, that Francesca in particular said, you know, boy, the roughest days for me, period. Right. So not just so like I need a clear brain to think creatively anyways. But the roughest days, just forget creativity, are those days where I basically come home from taking the kids to school, because my kids go to school twice a week in person, and I'm hauling them. Um, and then I get home at say 9 or 9:05, and I'm bang into a meeting, right? Just like right into whatever dumpster fire is going on, and without any time to kind of manage the monsters in my head and try to figure out what is most urgent. So yeah, I've started blocking time off, right? I fully block the 8 to 9 hour, just to not even get scheduled, to even have the specter of perhaps being on the phone while driving the monsters. Um, but then also I've blocked off whole swaths. In fact, I did this for next week, right? I happen to have about a 3 hour block on Monday that is uncharacteristically unscheduled, but now that's mine, and it's called my time, and it's required for me to be able to even kind of blow some of the stuff out. Another thing that Francesca said about, you know, parking it in front of the TV and drawing, right? Like I found myself using some of the meetings I'm expected to show up as that time, right? So I'm expected to show up and maybe say something uh, moderately insightful at the end, but you know, there's a whole lot of silliness in the middle where I don't need to pay much attention, but I have the drone of white noise in my ear, and I found myself actually in the past couple of days using that time to be able to push a few things forward. I probably shouldn't tell my colleagues that, but you know. So.
Oh, you're muted, Elaine.
Okay. Oh, thanks, Damien. What do you mean by pushing a few things forward?
So like you know, other projects where, you know, maybe we're stuck, right?
Right.
So I mean, like everyone, I it feels like I have at least 1,000 things going on. I mean, the truth of the matter is there's probably 3 urgent things going on at any time. And so trying to push those things forward, and getting myself unstuck or getting other people unstuck, what I found is that some of the meetings where I don't really have to participate, it's really been like treating it like it's a TV show. And just I mean, I hope, boy, that might be offensive actually to some of the people who run the meetings, and I don't mean it to be, but you know, they kind of being like, it's kind of like what you said, Francesca, like getting myself out of the way, and that helps me kind of push through some of these problems without, it's like I'm not really actively thinking about them, but I kind of am. I mean, I've found a lot of value in trying to use that time that way, whereas otherwise, you know, I would be sitting in a room in front of these people, and it's a little bit more obvious if I zone out, and maybe a little less, you know, corporate culturally inappropriate,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I find I've got the reason I think that the TV and the drawing worked is I wasn't watching the TV. I was just listening, and that the drawing is visual, you know, and with the hand. And I find I can't do anything when I got another meeting on. I got other things going in my ears. Forget it. You know, I either totally tune out or not. So
yeah.
So I'm interested in writing code. So I don't know, Damien, do you have any, are there any ways that are best that you found in your training courses to just kind of incentivize people to get in the zone of writing code? I would imagine that you need to have time that you set aside for that. I mean, the constant interruptions must make that really tough.
Yeah, so well, I'll talk first about the training courses. I've evolved in a direction of doing almost 100% live coding during the courses, which actually, now that I think about it, is not a good fit. There's some people on this call who were in one or more of the workshops that I just mentioned, and those were the exact opposite. So, so they haven't seen this aspect of it. But most of the teaching that I do these days is live coding, very few slides. And the nice thing about the live coding is I like for it to be interactive. I refer to them as code jams, kind of like a jam session in jazz, where the musicians are interacting and creating as they perform. And so I think that has, in fact, I'm not really realizing that until this moment, because as I said, I've been struggling with how to, piece this together. But now that I think about it, that has sparked a lot of creativity, because with the live coding, I really encourage questions and suggestions. And there are times in these classes, I mean, these are usually multi-day courses, 3-4 day courses. And so there are times when we might spend an hour or more going off on some idea that somebody posed in the class. And because it's a 3 or 4 day course, you can afford that time and still catch up and get to where you need to get. And so I think that's made it a lot more creative. In general, what I would say is that most of my time working, I feel under siege with multiple impending deadlines. And so I haven't really found a great way to just kind of block aside time to be creative. I've had multiple years over the past decade where my New Year's resolution was to say no more. So I need to work on that. But I think what I have done is figure out good scaffolding. And what I mean by that is ways of working breaks into my daily routine. I've had a long time, I'd say for the past 20 years, attraction to Zen Buddhism. I wouldn't say, I always refer to myself as a non-practicing Zen Buddhist, which is kind of an inside joke because Zen Buddhism is all about the practice. But there's a famous koan, which is one of the teaching stories in Zen Buddhism, where a young Zen monk says to an older Zen master, he's asking about how to get to the next step in his practice, the next level. And the older monk says, well, did you eat breakfast? And the younger one says, yes, I just had a bowl of porridge or, something like that. And the older one says, then wash your bowl. And that was the whole lesson. And the idea was, I think the idea of it is that anything you do, if you do it mindfully and slow down, that can actually be part of your practice. It can be sort of meditative. And so one of my habits is I've become kind of a coffee hobbyist. A few years ago, I discovered that you can buy your own green coffee beans and roast them yourself. And another thing is that all of my degrees are in mechanical engineering, but these days I'm essentially more of a computer scientist. And so as a hobby, I've gotten into buying a lot of things that are all mechanical with no electricity involved. And so I have a mechanical grinder for the coffee, and I have a mechanical espresso maker where you have these arms, kind of like a corkscrew that you press down, and I've calculated that with leverage you can get enough pressure in there to match an electric espresso maker. So I have this process where I can go from green beans to a nice espresso with a head of crema on it in about 15 to 20 minutes. And it's something I do daily. Most people would not want to take that much time for their coffee process, but I see it as part of my meditation. It's part of the scaffolding that slows me down and gives me some time to think about what I'm going to do that day.
It's interesting that that's also somewhat physical. Yeah. And so maybe that's, you're also balancing that, mental creativity with something that you're doing physically that's, just relaxing. And maybe the behaviors are repetitive. And so maybe that's a relaxing practice. Yeah.
I think you're exactly right about that. There's something about the process of doing something with my hands getting my hands occupied with something that's fairly routine gives my brain the space to think about other
Plus
things.
it's sensory, you're smelling,
Yeah.
when you roast the coffee, right? Or it's when you drink the coffee. So it's almost like a whole process. I like that a lot. Yeah, it's a
And
good
there is a saying that software engineers are people who convert caffeine into code.
Well, you're definitely making that happen. Yeah. And there's a question in the chat about multitasking. I wonder if we can just talk a little bit about that. We've mentioned it somewhat, where we're talking about the need to kind of schedule some separate time for ourselves. And, I think, Pat, you kind of touched on it. I mean, when you're in the meeting, you're multitasking a little bit, you're thinking about something else. I think there can be a real benefit to bringing a problem that you have that's different from what you're doing together, because sometimes you gain insights. So has anyone used multitasking to your advantage? We all know the ways with remote work that it's a disadvantage, but how can we use multitasking as an advantage? Like, I'll give you guys a second to think, and I'll just say that for myself, I like to work on about 3 things at a time, meaning that I'll have 3 separate either projects or things that I'm thinking about. I like to have them at different stages. And I learned this from my early practice in art. So I might be at a very early stage in one project where I'm at the ideation stage, and I may be at a very much more mature at the implementation stage in another project, and actually like having the different levels of projects together, working on them at the same time. And I go back and forth, and I feel that it helps my creativity because I'm in different stages of those projects. Anyone have any thoughts?
So I find that same thing, but I don't call that multitasking. I mean, I've got projects at different stages and on purpose. But that's so that when my brain doesn't know what to do on that one, I can move on to something else.
That's right. Yeah.
But I do think there's a note in the chat about puzzles and working on puzzles. And I think that that's kind of analogous to what I experience in kind of like generating a thought, is that there's part of me that's occupied. And we do a lot of research actually on touch and objects and sensory input and having, so someone else was talking about smell and different things. And so I think of those as the opposite of multitasking.
What would you call that, Francesca? Let's give that a name. Think about that.
So I think of it as like, runners and athletes talk about being in the zone.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes like it's that shutting off that internal voice and just letting all of yourself be right there.
Yeah, good. Adi, I'd like to hear from you. How about with your teams? How do you try to incentivize your team and yourself? I know you've got a lot of different levels of projects going on at the same time.
Sure, definitely. So I do agree with Francesca on this point, is that I define multitasking as exclusively working on the exact same time on 2 different things, not like kind of context switching between the two, because I do a lot of context switching. I think that's very successful. I do, however, think that multitasking is very tricky and it only works in certain contexts. I've also noticed that certain people are better at doing it. I mean, I have read studies about it being based on gender or just being practiced from childhood that way. I can tell from personal experience that there are certain things I can multitask on, and that combination only works for me if something is muscle memory. So for example, I can listen to an audiobook while cooking something that I have always cooked. But if I was trying to follow a new recipe and also listening to the audiobook, that doesn't work for me. Mm-hmm. So I've been able to multitask when one thing is just using a different set of senses, that's muscle memory. And so I'm able to do that a lot, but especially when both of those things require thinking, I feel like it's counterproductive, at least for me.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I agree with that. So like when I'm talking about doing something else while I'm in these meetings, I don't think that's truly actually multitasking either. A benefit of remote work and how we're living now is not only can I kind of sit here and do other stuff outside of this field of vision, right? So even if my camera's on, like I'm sitting here playing with this little coin, I'm playing with this rubber band, right? None of you know that, and that's fine and good. Well, you know now, but what's happening now is people are posting links in chat to the presentation, which I can peruse independent of what folks are saying. And so very frequently I'm part of meetings where I don't have to give deep feedback. I don't have to give a lot of very firm, thoughtful stuff. I kind of have to be a rubber stamp guy and say, yes, this fits. Thank you very much. And so we can argue about whether or not I should even be at that meeting, but that's a different topic. So today we'll take it as, yes, I have to be at that meeting, but I can buzz through the slides, and then really the person speaking, really they could be, they could be singing jingle bells, right? It's really just noise that's kind of coming into my ear, and my brain is wandering and doing some of these other things that just need to kind of get ticked off the list. That, by the way, clearing that helps my brain kind of get rid of some of the clutter, and I'm just using this time, I think, more effectively. Is that multitasking? I guess it's kind of like multitasking light, but because
Yeah.
again, I'm not really thinking about what is being presented to me.
Yeah, I think you guys are right. I don't really believe that that's multitasking exactly. In a way, it sounds like it's more than that in a different way. I wonder if we can go to the chat. I know that Pat mentioned that sometimes he goes to the chat, so maybe it's a good opportunity to check it out. So Ashley, can you just summarize, and are there any good questions there that we should address?
Yeah, so most of the things so far have been, kind of tips for how people are doing different things. So I guess one question that came up was the kind of following along what Francesca said, which is there a balance point between having a variety of things to work on to spur creativity versus having too many things that is disruptive to creativity?
I think the balance is critical, because if there's too much, then I'm not really working on what I'm supposed to be working on. I'm worried about all the other things that I have to get done in the day. And the key to really having some different approaches to problems, I think, is having that kind of quiet or downtime that, that doesn't have 16 voices in your head.
Yeah, we got some good tips. And so I think, just in essence of time, because I know you have a lot of questions for the panelists, I would just encourage people to read through those tips. I learned some things myself. So
great. All right, so let's talk a little bit then about some of the challenges that we have with teams in particular and innovation. This is a question that comes up every single time we have a panel discussion, and it is about how do we use tools, either brainstorming tools or mind mapping tools. What are some good tools we can use, and how can we capture that serendipitous moment at the water cooler when we're in a face-to-face environment? How do we do that online? Can we do that online? How important is that to our creativity? I think a lot of people really believe that it's very critical. That's a critical part of face-to-face work that we really miss when we're working remotely. So anyone have any thoughts about that?
I don't know how to recreate it, but I miss it.
You miss it?
Big time.
Yeah.
What is it that you miss about the water cooler?
I would run into people from who had a physically co-located office, but not on a like a similar team.
Mm-hmm.
And we would just bounce stuff off each other, right? I mean, that just happens.
Yeah.
And now it feels like, I have to cold call them, like I'm the Geico guy trying to sell them insurance or something. And that doesn't make me comfortable. And but like my team members have said, that doesn't make them comfortable. It's like, oh, it was so nice when I would just run into person X, or, we would have lunch together and then we would just talk about this thing because we were all in the same spot. And we just said, hey, I have this idea, let's bounce it off. We've not found an effective way in our area or with any of our teams to really recreate it in a year. And I think a lot of people are getting a little nuts with it. I think that's part of what kind of contributed to my colleagues saying, this has just been a slog with a
Right.
particular project, but I think that extends.
So I'm guessing that you must use asynchronous channels like Slack or Mattermost or.
Sure. I mean, we use Teams. One thing I've heard a lot of people say, we use Teams, we use Yammer, we use, just direct chat, of course. One thing I've heard people say, in fact, I said it as well to some of my team members, like, now it just feels like there's too many things to look at,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so I constantly feel behind on many things that might get mentioned there that I just am not in the habit of checking.
That's interesting. Maybe that's what the difference qualitatively could be, is that when you're in the office and you're co-located, it's an opportunity. It's a moment that you didn't look for it necessarily. It presented itself to you. Now it's the opposite. You have to go search it out. You've got to log into the chat channel, and so that might be the qualitative difference for a lot of us. Any other thoughts about just, that water cooler moment? What do you guys miss about the water cooler moment beyond, what Pat said? Anything different?
So I find that the water cooler moments for me actually were the coffee espresso machine moments, where I would run into people that weren't directly in my teams, but might be working tangentially on similar problems. And so and that's kind of a very artistic sort of process. It's that input from other spaces where you go, oh, well, that kind of solution, if we did blah, 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 and put it over here, it's those are the water cooler moments that I miss. And the team moments, I think, are the ones where we're waiting for somebody and we're just kind of, having that personal time. We also I noticed some people talk about missing the whiteboard. I'm a visual person. I can't think without a whiteboard. And we use Miro, but it's not the same.
Anybody use another tool besides Miro for whiteboarding?
Look, I can't think of a great way to reproduce the water cooler moment, or as you said, the espresso machine moment. And I definitely miss it. And I struggle a lot with what life is going to be like after the pandemic. There are things I think that have gone better with remote work and things that we've really lost, like the water cooler moment. The closest I've seen is GatherTown. I wonder if anybody's seen that.
Yeah.
Where you immerse yourself into what feels kind of like a game, and you can move from room to room. And when you come close to someone, you see that person's image come up, and you can actually, if that person's talking, you can hear what they're saying. Whereas if you're far from them, you can't hear what they're saying. So what I would compare to the water cooler moment is the hallway at a conference moment, right? Where you just randomly pass someone and you have this great conversation that sparks creativity. So I imagine you could recreate the water cooler moment with something like GatherTown for the workplace. I don't know how much people would like it. And
you'd have to take time off and dedicate to it. You'd have to take time off to dedicate just to that.
Yeah.
So in particular, Addie wanted us to talk about the micro interactions. How do we create more of those, as most of us are still working from home? Addie, I wonder if you want to say a little bit more about why you wanted us to talk about that topic.
Sure. So let me put a different spin on the water cooler conversations for a bit. So there are also people who go there to listen mostly because they may not be as outgoing to go strike up a conversation. But when you're in the vicinity, you hear a few people talking, and then maybe you follow up with them one-on-one. You miss out on all of these when people talk to each other on calls because you're just not on them. So I feel like, if there were tools to kind of create very organic kind of conversations where not every conversation is intentional. So one of the things that I guess I was thinking is to kind of use more general channels for people to chat at all. So I feel like people do use specific channels now because they feel like they don't want to bother anybody else. but then you're not part of those transactions for all the other people. So those are the small things that give you a spark of idea, which may, lead to something completely different. But so that's the part I miss most. But on the flip side, there's also this benefit that all the people who kind of like were about to bring their water cooler conversation, but never got a chance before people walked away, can now really think before sending that message, and they have the opportunity to do that. And because the playing field is leveled now. So in a way, that's kind of also good in some aspects. So it's very interesting that can we even recreate those online? If we can find a way, I think that would be great for anybody who in general is really not out there with respect to social interaction.
Mhm. This one way that I've, I think, tried for myself to recreate a sort of water cooler moment plus listening, having that audio while I'm working, that to spark my creativity, is to join some employee resource group meetings. That sometimes they might not even be necessarily something that's related to what I'm doing, but I just join different meetings sometimes, or different groups, just to sort of to meet people that have nothing to do with the work I'm doing, actually. And so it's a more effort on my part, but it's kind of, scratching that itch. Yeah. So I'm wondering if we can take a couple minutes now to kind of talk about now organizational creativity. And I've got my questions here that I'm looking at, and um, I want to ask, just, do you think that are we less creative, less innovative now than we were 1 year ago? I mean, Damien, I loved, in fact, your comment about how you're not sure that you would have had a creative thought that led to an innovation had you not been working from home. So that's a very cool, result. Has anyone else had anything like that in what you've been doing? Have you been able to what is it? Make lemonade out of lemons?
I have one example. It's not really related to work, but I was wanting to do work in my backyard, and the design people apparently are very busy because everybody thought of the same idea. So they told me that the design turnaround time is going to be 6 months. So I said, wait, no way, I can't wait that long. So I signed up for a service and I designed it myself. And I guess because all the cool people who put this in reusable components, so I feel like I would absolutely never have done that if I was not in this pandemic situation. But I feel like I learned a new skill, and I'm going to help friends do that too, because it'll save them dollars. So I thought that was very creative. I was very proud of it. Anybody wants to see pictures, maybe you can judge how bad I was.
That's great. No, that's true. That's really cool. It's true that we're probably all learning new skills, from this work at home experience. Anyone else?
So, I mean, certainly, like, not just at work, but outside of work, I'm doing a lot more things that I never would have thought to do, right? So I I I play the trombone. I play in an orchestra, I play in a band, and we can't meet, right? We are not meeting. It's just not happening. So, like, hearing Addie say, it's like she went and built a thing because, she wasn't going to wait 6 months. These bands I'm in, they want to play. People want to play. And so we're participating in the let's record ourselves and make videos, and somebody puts it together and puts it on YouTube. I have derived a lot of joy out of doing this just for myself, just recording myself, um, playing together with myself, and playing multiple parts, like, and that is something that I certainly had the capability. I could have procured the equipment, but I had no desire to do it beforehand. I mean, the only thing that has changed is that I had a desire driven to participate in these things that I was participating in, and the only way to do it now was virtually. Similarly at work, I think there've been a lot of improvements, right? At work, We used to have people who would be dedicated note takers, and now everyone just types in their own notes and they just do it in a shared space that's already up there. We could have been doing this all along, right? The difference, of course, is that, not everyone's allocated a laptop, so we'd physically gather in a room, and, not everybody's going to drag their machine with them. Not everyone's going to drag a personal machine, so just have a note taker. Well, no, this is an improvement. Now, people like the note taker is not misinterpreting what I'm saying. I'm saying what I'm saying. And so if it's misinterpreted, I have me to blame, which is great.
That's good.
Another thing, and this isn't germane to your question, but it's not something that somebody has said or yet today, but I think is a very important point, and it's been observed. I know, Mike Huru has observed it. I've heard him say it, and we've observed this at work now, where we have distributed offices. Now everybody's kind of on equal footing, right? Everyone has their own distributed offices. And in the past, it's like you'd have this critical mass of humans in one room, and the 2 or 3 people on the phone, because maybe they're at a remote office or maybe they just couldn't get there, they were easy to ignore. And I think this whole thing has shined a light on that. And I don't know how we go back to having the critical mass of humans in a room. So
You mean effectively?
that's right. I mean, what I think is, it may be that we all start taking meetings in our own offices, right? Like we may have no more need for conference rooms except to just hang out.
Right.
No, I miss a lot from the facial expressions of being in person. But
I agree.
yeah, but one thing that kind of builds on what you said is one thing that this large team of 20, some people are more vocal than others. I'm on the vocal side. I just tell myself to shut up on a regular basis. But what we do is we have everyone we have weekly meetings, and everyone comes with one slide, and the slide deck is put together. You just drop your slide in before the meeting, and so that way everyone has a chance to say, like, this is what I've been doing, and this is how it connects to this guy and this person and that person. And so because the quieter voices have an opportunity or are forced to participate, and we have a much better sense than just a verbal report of what everyone's doing. And that kind of reporting, and then we stop right at that slide, and we'll talk about, well, what if you did this and what if you did that? So that is the best thing that I have found that we've done to really help with group meetings.
That I wonder if that's analogous to what you may experience if you're doing live coding, or if you're at least doing some type of coding exercise together. Have you guys noticed that? Especially Damien and Pat and Addie?
I've certainly noticed a big increase in productivity my biggest project is with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and we have all 4 of the Sorcery employees working on that. And the project is budgeted to allow for 1 day a week software development sessions that are, part of agile sprints, basically. So where we're trying to release every 2 to 3 weeks. And I'd say early on, we got like several releases ahead. Like we had so much good stuff that we were maybe kind of holding back a little bit because we knew we were going to have this self-imposed pressure to release every 2 to 3 weeks. And so what we've done, and we have 2 team members in the San Francisco Bay Area, one in Missouri and one in Oregon. And so what we decided is that we're going to be online every Friday, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. with, breaks as needed. Like everybody should feel perfectly fine to step away and go to the bathroom or walk the dog or, whatever, but we're just going to be online during this time. And everyone should also feel fine if they need to mute the call for an hour or however they need, however long they need to get done what they need to get done, but we could still reach them with a chat message or something like that if need be. And we have found them to be phenomenally productive. With asynchronous communication like email, you send something and you don't know how long it's going to take to get a reply. Sometimes could be days. We can just ping each other with a quick question, if we need to. And yeah, I feel like we've been raging forward. What I was trying to do is simulate what it would be like to be at cubicles in the same room. And I think it's actually worked quite well. Even though I say it's worked quite well, I definitely am someone who comes down on the side of missing in-person work. And so I look forward to getting back to it. But I have to admit that at least in this particular kind of work, it's maybe even been a boost. We probably spend more time, focused on working together than we might have if we were in an office and being pulled away by meetings or things like that.
Right. I used to have a colleague years ago. We were in the same office, but kind of separated by a divider, and we would talk to each other. And when the conversation got important, then we would scoot our chairs out from behind the divider so we could see each other. So it was really interesting that we had two different modes of communication. So I wonder, Ashley, if there are some good questions or comments that the audience would like us to address from the chat.
So mostly still just everyone kind of sharing the things that they're finding are working for them in these spaces. And so there's definitely a sense of excitement about getting back to work. But then there's also what does that mean? How will that impact productivity? As people have said, in some ways they're more productive, and maybe in that way can be more innovative and creative. And then, of course, there is no replacement for whiteboards. And so someone missed an opportunity during this pandemic to create the perfect whiteboard tool. I think it made a lot of money, but I think that kind of summarizes it at this point.
All right, yeah. I do have one final slide that I wanted to show everyone, because I think it could be a culminating slide that I'd like for all of us, the panelists, to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And you kind of got a preview of it already. But so here it is. And let's see. So these are 10 strategies for increasing innovation, creativity. And this is from Daniel Burrus, a Huffington Post article. And so these are his strategies. And I would just like to share them and see, let's take the next few minutes to the end of our session to really talk about them a bit. So in the area of creativity, and I've kind of binned them into these three different categories. But with respect to creativity, he makes this point about that creative people have developed their ability to observe and use all their senses. So we should take time to sharpen the blade, while we're working from home. Actually, this is not, to be honest with you, these strategies are just in general. This is not necessarily for working at home. But I like this. I really like this focusing on the senses, because I think that will add a lot of dimensionality to the work that we do. So even thinking about our senses, I think is important here. And so Damien's already talked about the ways, and and Francesca and Pat too mentioned it, and Adi too. I mean, just the ways that we're dealing with, and we are pulling in our senses into this remote work experience. And then we've talked about this shifting, incubating ideas, shifting to another place, going and playing trombone, for example. But we haven't really talked about creativity as problem solving a bit. And I wonder if you guys want to make a comment about this last one, redefining the problem completely. So creativity is problem solving. I mean, that's what we do every single day. Do you guys have any insights that you'd like to share about this in particular?
I find that the problem solving creativity is that, that's a group activity. That really is, it's a dialogue is when our teams are best. Small groups, it's absolutely critical, and that one idea bounces off another, and that's how we solve problems, because we see another perspective.
Mm-hmm. So that's good in a small group in particular. Yeah. Right. I found that problem solving in large groups can sometimes lead to groupthink. It kind of devolves into that. How about with the software teams? What do you guys think about, problem solving?
I agree a lot with what you just said about groupthink. In fact, I also agree a lot with what Francesca just said. So, part of what I think, so my colleague who referred to designing her feature as a slog, in the past when we had similar things to do, we had a small group in a room, and it's a lot, for whatever reason, like it's a lot different to get 4 people in a room than it is to kind of get 4 people on a Zoom. And
Mhm.
I'm not quite sure why, but it is. I guess here, right? Like my kids are outside the door, I hear them, right? I guess if I'm in a room that's physically removed from that, then there can be a lot of improvement. Um, but like, so the small groups, problem solving, like working through those design issues in a small group is really, very powerful. And then when you get in the room with a lot of people, like very frequently I'm thinking in terms of, we'll have a small team design a thing, and then we'll have a larger group kind of design review that. And so
Mhm.
the larger group is bringing with it like a lot of baggage, right? A lot of, this is the way we do things, right? And so, boy, that's like groupthink writ large, right? It's like, we do things this way. This is the way we do it. And so you come up and say, look, dude, let's do this. Oh, I don't know. That's out of model, right? And so
Uh,
nothing is more soul sucking than being out of model. That's
Right.
probably not true. I can probably think of 6 things that are more soul sucking. But um, the point is, like, mm, you know, and that's true whether we're in person or remote.
Right. That is true.
So
So with regard to innovation, I just want to move on a little bit more because we have a few more minutes. But with regard to innovation, I think this is the one in the center here is really interesting to me, about patterns and about being able to recognize when new patterns are useful. And I wonder, I'd like to hear maybe from Addie and Damien, if you guys, you know, feel free to talk about anything that you find interesting on this list. But I wonder if you have something to say about that or in the area of innovation.
So one of the things that I think I really like about this is embracing the new normal. Because I know we all keep talking about going back, but really we aren't going back. For example, my most favorite part of the day was eating lunch with my team. And I don't envision doing that anytime soon. Even if we were to go back, I don't know if that would be a safe activity we can engage in. So I think that sometimes it's good to recognize a new pattern and develop new methods for it. Like, how would we interact now on, or how would we problem solve now on? And I feel like it's something that I think Pat had mentioned that we also have a few people who were remote earlier as well, and I think we did kind of forget about them a lot in the past. So now we, with the new blended reality, I think we're more aware. So this maybe was the true way to include everybody. So I feel like this is probably creativity and innovation in our methods itself. So that is definitely my takeaway from it. That because, like they always say, necessity is the mother of invention.
Right.
Now we're forced to solve this problem creatively, and we're trying to come at a solution. And I think collectively, so I feel like there's innovation within these points. So I definitely think it's a great idea to just think about those strategies going forward.
That's great. Thank you. And Damien, I wonder if you want to just take us home with making a comment about mindset or maybe something that you're thinking about right now. One of the bullets I like about the mindset is look where others aren't looking. I like that a lot. I think that when you are remote, it does kind of give you a perspective that's, you can be a little more objective, a little more removed. And there are ways to use that to your advantage in with respect to organizational creativity and innovation, for sure.
Well, so it doesn't necessarily tie in with remote work, but when it says look where others aren't looking, I mean, I feel like I've spent most of my career sprinting in the opposite direction of most of the field, because most people who actually cared about, good software design practices abandoned Fortran 20 years ago or more. whereas I've been focused on how can we improve the development of Fortran. One of the main things I've been thinking about in this whole discussion that I haven't had a chance to bring out is just diversity of work styles. And, how do we, an issue that we're grappling with as we speak, like this week in particular, is how do we let each person work in the way they feel most productive? On this team that are doing this work for the NRC, there's 2 companies. There's someone in the other company who's writing Fortran 77. And I've been trying to work out a workflow where we can take his code, transform it, and merge it in with what we're doing. And I was really happy with what I came up with. And then the client has decided, no, we've got to drag this guy into the 21st century. I don't know that what he's saying is what the client's saying is actually right, except that the customer's always right. But this guy is semi-retired, and he was the hero developer of this entire code before we were brought in to modernize it. So there's also the chance that he might just walk away, right? So we have to think about diversity of work styles and how each person can be productive in the way they feel is most productive.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a great comment to end our discussion on. Sorry that we've gone over just 2 minutes, but I just really want to thank you all very, very much. So thank you, Francesca, Addie, Damien, and Pat. And Ashley and I are really grateful that you joined us today. We had a lot of great interaction in the chat. In summary, Ashley, is there anything that you want us to pull out?
Yeah, so I think the main thing I took away from the chat is that, some people are very much looking forward to kind of this return to normal, because sensory overload for them is being at home on Zoom all day long with all of these multiple dings and dongs and videos. And so getting back to the office for them, they feel like will actually be better. And then others are, I would prefer to stay remote and keep trying to learn how to use these tools that we have at our disposal to be innovative, productive, and collaborative. And so I think it's very situational. Some of us have kids at home, some of us don't. And so I think everyone, probably has from their own experience and their own needs, the way that they would like to work in the future. So very interesting. I really appreciate all the great tips that everyone shared on how they have been coping and coming up with all of these things that they've done to try to, keep things as on track as we can right now. And in some cases, people have found ways to even improve upon their productivity and creativity.
That's good. I really am happy to hear that. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that when we do go back to the office, we're all going to go back together, meaning that there will be some going back to a co-located space, but then there are going to be others of us who are going to remain remote. So don't forget about us. We've got to do this together. We have to make it work. And we have the ability to do that. So anyway, thanks again to all the panelists, the audience. We really appreciate your participation. And I look forward to the next panel, which will be about 3 months from now. So thanks, everybody. Thank you for your time and see you soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone. And just a quick reminder, I put the link in chat for our questionnaire. We'd really love your feedback as we start to look at the next one. If there are topics you want to discuss or other things like that, please let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.